So we do try to get out and
Okay.
And I have 4.
Should I wait or should I just hit the gavel?
If you hit the gavel, he'll come to us.
Yes. I'd like to call to order the November 20th, 2023 special meeting of the Ravenna School District Board of Education. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Calhoun,
Here.
Mrs. Dennison,
here.
Mrs. Seaman,
Here.
Mr. Tantamonia. Here. And
If
Mr.
we-
Wisniewski is absent.
Yes, if we could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We could please have a moment of silence. Any additions or corrections to the agenda?
No, not tonight.
Okay. Can we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or discussions? Roll call?
Mrs. Seaman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dennison?
Yes.
Mr. Tantamonia? Yes. Mrs. Calhoun?
Yes. We can have the superintendent's update.
Yes. When we were talking this week, as we prepared for this meeting, we wanted to kind of split the work into 2 parts. One was to give just an overall election update, and then the second is to go into the finances as it was impacted by the election. So first, I just wanted to share with you, there's 17 total precincts, and of those precincts, we won 3. We won City 1A, City 2C, and City 4B. We were close in City 2B, where we lost by 28 votes, but we lost in every township precinct. However, overall, we increased the total number of votes by a significant amount. We had significant amount of yes votes. We had 990-something the last election. We had 2,400 in this election. But despite that 2,400, what we took out of it is some general impressions, I guess. One is that a lot of things that caused people to vote no were a little bit out of our control. There is increased property taxes are coming soon, and whether or not that will affect be affected by a levy. People don't really understand that House Bill 920
920.
shrinks the amount of money that actually goes to it, so it wouldn't really be affecting it that much, but people don't understand that. So there's an increase in property taxes coming. We've been facing high inflation, and then there's just a general negative attitude towards a tax increase, especially in the township where there is some concern that they don't have the same services that perhaps maybe the city might have. And so having that increase would be a disadvantage. The campaign itself, we feel, is pretty solid in that we targeted the right voters, we had excellent data, an excellent list to work from, we sent out our messages with a lot of frequency, and we tried the ballot chasing for the first time where we, followed up with absentee voter registration. But coming out of it, I think our general overview is that the voters that came out that day were what you would probably call anti-institution voters, for lack of a better word. They rejected government involvement in women's health care, they rejected government involvement in recreational drug use, and basically they rejected school levies across the state. In fact, only 2 new money levies in Northeast Ohio passed, and that was in Hudson and Aurora, and those passed barely. So while I know it's disheartening, it's important to realize that it's everywhere. Every single school district who had new money on the ballot, with the exception of those 2, failed. So I just wanted to kind of give you that update before we got into the financial piece of things, just as an election overview, I guess, for lack of a better word. And those precinct and the voting things are not formal yet. They haven't sent out something that documented it formally. So that's the best I could pull from what I could find.
One trend that I noticed was the number of non-voting voters. 6,365 people cast votes for the uncontested Board of Education, according to the final report. But only 5,901 casted votes on issue 16. So 464 more people were at the ballot to vote on school board members in an uncontested race than actually voted for the levy. And a non-vote is a no vote. So I just want to make sure that we keep in mind that too when we're looking at people. The other thing I think, the levy committee did a wonderful job. The one thing that I would look at, we've focused a lot on diversity, equity, and inclusion, just the makeup of that committee and making sure that we have people that are speaking to all of the population so that we can reach some of the people in a different way. Because a lot of times if it's a familiar face or someone in your circle that's bringing the message, you're more apt to listen. So we could use that opportunity to enhance potentially our outreach also. But that number, that just really surprised me, the difference between the people who were, they're at the polls, but they just chose to not vote at all on that issue. And that was concerning. And again, that's just based on the final report. I know that the data may change, but there still is a significant gap there.
Good, both good points. All right. That's my update. Thank you.
Can we move on to reports of the treasurer?
Yes, thank you. You have a copy of this presentation in front of you this evening. I wanted to review the points of the 5-year forecast and how that is impacted by the election results from a couple weeks ago. So, okay, there we are. First, I gave you the 5-year forecast summary chart again. And this is what you saw in October when we talked about the 5-year forecast. And this shows you the current base year of 2024, which is our current fiscal year, and then the 4 next years, which are included as part of this 5-year forecast. And where we start with in 2024, we have an unreserved fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. We're we're projecting of just over $1 million. And that's because we worked hard to get to this budget this year. We did a reduction in force. We offered an employee severance plan, and we've carefully managed those ESSER funds that we received 2 years ago and that are still carrying over into this fiscal year. So that was a lot of work that went into maintaining that $1 million fund balance for the end of this fiscal year. But when you look at next fiscal year, which will start, it's fast approaching, July 1, 2024, that'll be fiscal 2025. And you see there, we have an unreserved fund balance of $33,661. That's essentially a zero in the finance world. When you're looking at a $30 million budget and you have $33,000 as a balance, that's a cause for concern. So that's why we are taking a careful look at our 5-year forecast. We need about $1.6 million a month to make payroll. So when you look at just having $33,000 as a fund balance, that's a concern. And 2025 is also when our negotiated agreements end at the end of that fiscal year. So going forward, you see we have a negative fund balance in 26, 27, and 28. And those would be the years that we would be negotiating our contracts for. So legally, we cannot enter into a contract of any kind, including a employment contract for 26, 27, and 28 because of those negative balances. Okay, our next slide shows that in a graph form again. And again, not new, I showed you this in October, but I think it's a good picture of how our revenue remains flat. Our primary funding source is the Fair School Funding Plan from the state of Ohio. And while the state of Ohio continues to fund that formula with more money, our district is seeing a decline in enrollment. And the funding is tied to a per pupil allocation. So as our enrollment is declining, that's putting some stress on our school foundation funding. Revenue also remains flat because despite increases to property tax valuations, like Dr. Hebert said, House Bill 920 limits the amount of revenue we receive to the total amount that was approved by the voters at the time it was approved. So if you pass a 6.9 mil levy to collect $2.7 million, you will not collect more than $2.7 million from residential agricultural properties. The millage will be decreased, so it maintains that same level of funding. The millage is just decreased. Expenditure costs continue to increase, however. Our contracts have increases in them for salaries. There's increases to our utility costs, our fuel costs, our special services contracts, and our fringe benefit costs. So we see expenses just increasing consistently each year, despite the fact that our revenue remains the same. The next slide is the one that really keeps me up at night. This shows you that ending cash balance in true cash days. So if you look at 2025, the estimate for 25, it's zero. That's that $33,000. That's not even 1 day's worth of cash. The GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association, and they recommend that a district have about 60 days of cash on hand. For our district, that would mean about $4.8 million in 2024. You you can see that we have not operated that way in the past. Our district doesn't have a policy that regulates that, and it hasn't been a standard in the past 3 years here in Ravenna schools. But it's worth considering the timing of our revenues and expenses when you look at this, because it's important to remember that our payroll is done twice a month, on the 5th and the 20th each month. So our expenses are fairly consistent throughout the 12 months of the year. But a big chunk of our revenue, about 40%, that property tax money is received only twice a year, in July and February. So again, it's the timing of when we receive our revenue, that if we don't have any balance on hand, we run the risk of not being able to make payments on our obligations when they're due. The next slide, again, I included in the 5-year forecast, but it really starts the conversation for this evening. Our levy history shows that we have not received a current expense, we have not passed a current expense levy since 2005 on the February ballot in 2005. At that time, it was 6.5 mils, and again, due to that House Bill 920 reduction, its effective rate is down to 5.12 mils. The district's valuation, I put that at the bottom of the page, is $387,550,880. That's our total valuation for all of our residential, agriculture, commercial, and public utility property in the district. The 6.5 mil levy that was passed in 2005 the first collection was in 2006, collects about $2 million per year. And it has consistently since 2006. But the next slide shows you a comparison to then and now of our expenses. I went back through some old contracts that I found in my office, because this was well before I was with the district, but found that our REA base salary back in 2005, fiscal 2005, was just over $30,000, and now it's just over $40,000. The same thing with the highest salary on our salary schedule for teachers. Now it's $65,363, or I'm sorry, then it was $65,363. Now it's $86,113. Again, an increase of just over 30%. And another salary that I found from 2005 was our base salary for starting bus drivers. Then it was $12.25 an hour. Now it's $17.19. And we're still having a hard time recruiting them. So you see how our salaries have increased, as to be expected, since 2005. But the consideration is that the revenue has remained the same, and that last levy has remained the same at about $2 million. The number that stands out the most, though, is at the bottom, is the medical premium amount. So when we say there's been cost to salary and benefits, the benefit number really hits home. Back in 2006, our annual premium for single medical insurance was just over $4,000. Now it's almost $11,000. So that's a 163% increase. At the time, the district was paying 95% of that premium. The employee was paying 5%. Now the district is paying 85%, and the employee is paying 15%. But the difference is so significant overall. And the same with married medical premium coverage. It went from $10,000 a year to almost $27,000 a year. So you can see how that's impacted our expenses in salary and benefits just since 2005. And again, I didn't include it, but you've seen it in the 5-year forecast, that 80%, over 80% of our budget is salary and benefits. So this is really where our greatest costs are. And to be expected, they've increased, and our revenue has remained fairly flat. The next chart, I think I mentioned as an aside in the presentation with the 5-year forecast, because I didn't include it in the forecast. But this was the impact of the most recent levy that was put to the voters in November. So this is how it would have impacted our 5-year forecast. At the bottom of the page, you see it would have started collection this fiscal year in February of 2024, and we would have received a half a year collection, essentially $1.3 million. Added to our already estimated $1 million cash balance, we would have ended the year with just under $2.5 million fund balance. And then you see it compounded each year because it doesn't include in the revenues at the top. So you see the half collection from this year added to the full year collection in 2025, and going forward a full year collection each year. And you see that those unreserved fund balances for 25, 26, and 27 were all over $4 million. You know, when I talked to Dr. Hebert about this, I said, you know, timing is important. Timing that levy revenue for collection in 2024 was important because we didn't quite need it yet. And it allowed us to build that cash balance almost up to the recommended level of 60 days of cash on hand. So it really did have a significant impact if it had passed in 2023 and we could have begun collection in 2024. This is how our forecast would have looked. And I would have recommended to the board that we actually file another 5-year forecast with the Ohio Department of Education, kind of as an optional submission, just to show them that we had made progress in addressing the concerns of our forecast. But I'll show you, again, an updated version of that. If the revenue begins collection in 2025, how that looks. So the first kind of asterisk, just to remember that this is a forecast and a projection, and you know, I always say it's as good as the information that you have right now. If we use the current valuation on 6.9 mils, it generates $2.674 million of new revenue per year. I would say that that's being very conservative. We can assume that there will be a valuation increase next year. Maybe not significant enough to change that, but just a note to say that, you know, the 2.674 may change. And the county auditor would certainly certify that number for us if we were to be on the ballot in 2024. But with the 1-year delay in collections, you see that first half-year collection beginning in 2025, fiscal 2025, it would actually be collected in February of 2025. You can see on the bottom unreserved fund balance line that our unreserved fund balance never exceeds $2 million. So it really does have an impact by delaying that collection as to the overall picture. And again, when you get down to fiscal 2028, which is that 5th year of our 5-year forecast, we're positive, but not by a lot, so less than $500,000. So even considering all things being equal with a 1-year delay in a collection of new revenue, now you almost need to consider reducing some expenses to accompany that new revenue as well. So just wanted to mention the next steps. And I found this photo that I took of this young man at the Halloween parade at West Park Elementary, and I thought he was so cute, I had to include him. But the next step, I would say, would be the opportunities that we can explore to reduce expenses. And just kind of an overview of that would include looking at state minimums of services that we need to provide, looking at our class sizes, looking at some of the non-mandatory programs and extracurriculars that the district provides to see where there are some opportunities to cut some costs going forward. There's also an opportunity for new revenue. Again, Ohio's 2024 primary is March 19th, and we can certainly, as we have done in the past, take actions to be on that March ballot. As you know by now, that the process involves 2 resolutions. The first resolution, the board needs to pass and then send that information to the county auditor, who certifies the valuation, the millage, and the amount that would be collected, and then sends it back to us with that certificate. We put another resolution on the ballot. The board has to approve it with 4 votes, and then we can send that information to the Board of Elections. The deadline for that process to happen is December 20th, 2023, to be on that March 19th, 2024 ballot. It's always a 90-day lead time. So those resolutions and that certificate need to be delivered to the Board of Elections by December 20th. And certainly, being 2024, calendar year 2024, the other opportunity to be on the ballot is November 5th, which is the presidential election. The 90-day deadline for that election is August 7th. So if we needed to take actions following the March 19th election, we would have several months to do so. Just continuing along the lines of those next steps, if the board does consider a levy and new revenue going forward, there are 3 questions that we need to address in our levy resolution. And that is, first, what type of levy do we want to put on the ballot? Tonight you will see both options on our board agenda. So the board can certainly decide for either one or both, I guess, or neither. The first type is an emergency levy, and that's a levy that is worded on the ballot to collect a specific dollar amount. So the emergency being the district needs a set amount of money to operate each year, and so that's why we would name that dollar amount in the emergency levy. The county auditor then would adjust the millage each year at collection time to reduce or increase to that amount of revenue for the district each year. The second type of levy is that current expense levy, and that's what we have put on the ballot in the past. The current expense levy collects in mills. Mills are reduced each year to collect the same amount of money. So a similar process. But when you put the question on the ballot to the voters, you are putting it in terms of millage. So you're offering them, as we did, a 6.9 mil current expense levy. The next question then is, how much revenue would the levy generate? Again, in a dollar amount, our last ballot issue for 6.9 mils equated to $2.674 million in 2023. So that was the 2023 valuation. Again, a 6.9 mil levy in 2024 may be slightly higher because of a new valuation. I did also look at calculations for each mill again, and I think I've given this information to the board in the past in a presentation when we first started talking about new property tax revenue. But I think, again, it's important to mention some of these amounts. The calculation for revenue with mills takes the district's valuation amount, that 387, 550, 880, and divides it through by 1,000 to give you 1 mill. When you multiply that by, for example, 6.9 mills, that's how you get that 2.674,101 actually. So if you were to say how much would a 1 mill levy generate, it would be $387,550. You would double that for a 2 mill levy. A 3 mill levy brings in just under $1.2 million. A 4 mill levy brings in about $1.5 million a year. A 5 mill levy brings in about $1.9 million a year. A 6 mill levy brings in $2.3 million a year. Of course, we know the 7 mill levy is just over 2.6 million. 8 mills finally gets us over $3 million, about $3.1 million a year. A 9 mill levy would be just under $3.5 million a year. And then, of course, it's easy to calculate a 10 mill levy. It would be $3.875 million a year. So we've looked at that chart before, but again, just to remind you of the simple calculation of how we determine how much our levy should be in total. The other number that we may want to consider is our cost to taxpayers. The last levy would have levied about $20 per month for each $100,000 of value on a homeowner's property. So I believe the levy committee used that to communicate to folks to say, this would cost you about $20 a month, considering that the average property value in Ravenna is about $100,000. The final question that we need to consider if we want to consider a new revenue levy is how long would we generate the new revenue. An emergency levy cannot be continuing, so we would have to limit that to either 5 or a maximum of 10 years. Our last levy was a current expense levy for 5 years. The time limit of 5 years, again, was tied to our strategic plan of 5 years. It ties in nicely with our 5-year forecast of 5 years. It gives us an opportunity then in 5 years to take a look at our opportunities for another levy, whether we want the same or a new amount of revenue. And I guess you could consider the same thing in 10 years. The difference in renewing a current expense or an emergency levy would be an emergency levy can be replaced with a substitute levy. A current expense levy can simply be renewed. So just a little bit different semantics. The lawyers hashed over some of that information with us. So there's some specifics to those resolutions. But again, on tonight's board agenda, you have both options. So you've had an opportunity to read through the language of both resolutions. Finally, just to point out the key takeaways, again, from what I wanted to communicate with the board tonight about really the impacts of the voters not approving new revenue beginning this year. So the 5-year forecast did not include that revenue. We're not required to do anything with the state of Ohio. We don't need to file any revisions at this time. It does mean, though, that there will be no new revenue collected in fiscal '24, the first half of fiscal '25. The timeline then to be on the next ballot would be March 19th, if that's the direction, or I'm sorry, the March 19th ballot, the timeline would require actions before December 20th of this year, if that's the route that the Board of Education wants to take. So I would recommend that we start acting now at tonight's meeting and then take the follow-up action on the December 4th Board of Education meeting. And then finally, I just include as a takeaway, because of the delayed collection with any new revenue that we would receive now, that we continue to consider before fiscal 2025 budget planning begins in February and March, what type of expenditure reductions we can make in that fiscal 2025 budget. That was the information I had for you this evening. If you have any questions, we can discuss it now, or we can certainly discuss it during the approval of financial items. Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions?
If we can move on to reports of the treasurer.
Okay. So again, the items for recommendation this evening may require a little bit of discussion from the board. First, we put the resolution for an emergency levy. And again, the board would need to determine the total amount of money, new revenue to generate with that additional tax. I believe the template that's in there is set for 5 years. So if the board did determine to approve an emergency levy and the amount, we could either go with the recommended amount on the resolution of 5 years, or we could have the board revise that. The second resolution then is the current expense levy. Again, you're more familiar with that. We've done this twice already this year, put these on the ballot for 6.9 mils. The template that you have attached to your agenda does not include a total amount of millage. That would be for the board to determine. Again, I believe the template includes 5 years, but we could do that for 5, 10, or a continuing amount of time. So that's, if anyone has any questions, I can certainly answer them. I believe the recommendation is, moving forward, I think the recommendation is to generate new revenue for the district in either one of these formats, whatever the board prefers, or if they need, if you need any additional information, we can certainly try to provide that. Any questions?
Tons of them.
Okay.
As far as, I know there's 2 resolutions there. Mm-hmm. Pam, can we discuss, you think, before we choose either one of those? We don't want to do them both, do we?
I wouldn't recommend doing them both. I would recommend one or the other.
Right. So I think we really need to have some discussion about that. The 5-year emergency versus the additional, correct? Mm-hmm. We sure are not even close on the additional. That's a scary thing. So we might be wise to reestablish ourselves with the emergency, in my opinion, and that would get us by a couple years, and then we could maybe get a different perception of what we are and who we are, and our real true needs, which are pretty well explained already. But I think we might have a better chance simply to go with the emergency. It does ring different when you read it. And if we weren't so far apart on the other, I don't know that I would say the same thing, but I think we'd stand a better chance of getting emergency levy passed, and definitely start with it in March.
Question, Kenny, with the emergency, you said that that can be replaced. Replaced with a current expenditure? I mean, what are the options for replacing that?
I believe the term for replacing that is called a substitute levy. So when you replace it with the substitute levy, you go on the ballot as no additional tax.
Does it become a current expense levy at that time?
It does not. It just continues to collect that dollar amount. So when you see the chart of the levy history, it would look a little bit different. So on here, you see the column that includes current expense, and then it has a total millage, and then it has an effective millage. That would look a little bit different with an emergency levy. Only because it would include, instead of a total millage, it would include a total dollar amount and then an effective millage to collect that dollar amount.
And that can be 5 years or 10 years?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. It's a maximum of 10
Maximum of
years.
10 years, okay.
I agree with Mike. I think we need to go with the emergency levy rather than, at least people think, well, that's only 5 years. I don't know if that'll make a difference or not with the attitude that people seem to have nowadays.
Can I say something? I think the deal with the emergency levy is that it has a dollar amount. And I think when you put a levy on that is 6.9, I think some people might find that to be confusing or offsetting. But if you're saying it's 2.7 for 5 years and that's what we need, it feels, I don't know, it's not in real life, but it feels more, it feels more transparent.
Yeah, more relatable.
More relatable, that's better, because I think people, if you're asking them to do the math to convert the millage, I think people are like, I don't want to do that. Can't you just tell me what you need? You know what I mean? And so while the emergency levy is called an emergency levy, it's really just a different way of packaging what you're asking for. And in my opinion, it's just a way that people might understand a little bit better, especially if you, for 2.75 million, you are really concise and intentional and clear about what you're going to use that money for, versus, well, we have this millage, they don't want to know that.
I agree also with the emergency levy. I would just add that regardless of what we choose, we are going to have to go on the ballot. So we better make sure that we understand why people voted no, why they did not vote, so that we really can put everything we have into getting this thing passed. The other question I have just is about, where we are fiscally. Like, you hear fiscal caution, fiscal watch, fiscal emergency. Anytime the auditor of state starts to see red, like that triggers things. So, just the types of reporting and the different things that you are going to have to do now. Like, where are we at now?
Those fiscal levels of watch, caution, emergency actually come from the Ohio Department of Education.
Okay.
After they review our 5-year forecast. Okay. So they would be reviewing all the forecasts that are submitted by the November 30th deadline and determining which districts are in a position that warrant one of those statuses. They would notify the district and they would really ask us for our plan of action, right? We have not been in that position because we have continued to plan ahead and make appropriate reductions and take appropriate actions so that we have not gotten to that level. But I think we're closer to that than ever, right? We really need to address something in next year, and I think, they know who has levies on ballots coming up, so they knew about the May election, they knew about the November election, so they knew that the district was taking action, but I think going forward, we could expect information coming from the state of Ohio, especially knowing that our negotiated agreements are wrapping up, and that we're going to be starting that process, and they're going to want to know what our plan is for that. So, I think there's a lot of extra work that's going to go into addressing that for the state of Ohio. And certainly you don't want to end up in a fiscal emergency situation. Fiscal emergency means that the state of Ohio will come in and help you with your plan very aggressively. And that, we're not necessarily the drivers in that process anymore. So we want to avoid that at all costs.
But if we're a caution, fiscal caution, we still have the ability to.
I believe we do still have the ability to make adjustments to our budget or continue to take action to address our negative balances, yes. So I think the thought tonight was to put these options out there for the board, and also give you an opportunity to discuss what you thought would work to bring in new revenue to the district. Certainly my recommendation is to select one of the two options, not both, but I did want to make sure that you had the language for both at this meeting. You can certainly take action this evening if you want to, again, define those three things. Type of levy, amount of levy, and length of time of the levy. If you need more time to consider that and we want to have a discussion at a future meeting, we can certainly schedule something, but again, we need 2 actions by the board with probably about a week in between to get that levy certification from the county auditor's office. So again, if we don't want to take an action tonight, we don't need to, but if we start taking action on the 4th, we will need another meeting before the 20th.
Excuse me. And Candy, can I also, I want to make sure I understand, but we could put both levies on the ballot. You can have an emergency levy and a continuing resolution at the same time. I'm not saying
Yes.
that's what we need to do. I'm just saying there is a
That's a strategy.
there is a strategy that you put them both on there. They vote down one, they vote for the other. But I mean, it's not one or the other. It's one or the other or both or none. We really have like 3 options, I guess.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah, tonight we could approve both these resolutions for tonight and then make a decision at the board meeting, which one. Candy?
If you approve both, I would send both of the resolutions to the county auditor for certification. They would both come back, and we could put the second resolution on the next board meeting on December 4th, and the board could at that time decide which one they wanted to move forward with. Obviously, we need 4 votes for the next one to move forward, to be approved. I suppose if nobody made a motion for it, or nobody seconded the motion, then we would not move forward with that one.
And does it costs money each time we send something to the auditor to take action with, right?
No.
Oh,
No,
okay.
the county auditor doesn't, I don't believe they charge us
Okay.
for that.
It's
We do have a small legal expense for
Yeah.
them to prepare these levies for us.
Right.
Because, again, this is very prescribed Ohio Revised Code language in these resolutions, and I would hate to screw something up and not include a piece of information that was required. So I certainly defer to council on these resolutions.
And I wasn't recommending one way or the other, I just want to make sure that everybody knew you had that, all three options.
Well,
Yeah.
I think, in my mind, we don't have much choice. We can do the same thing we've done twice and get our butts kicked the third time. I think we're going to have to make a major change somewhere along the line, and we can't put it off forever. So I definitely think we need to do the emergency levy and approach it differently, campaign it differently. Social media is killing us. It's killing us. And maybe we need to take a different approach on, or actually be active on social media instead of letting just naysayers on it. So, I don't know.
I think, Mike, that, social media is good, but I think we need to get out in front of and find out what people are thinking. We need to address concerns out there, whatever they are, whether it's going to the township, the meetings or whatever, but we really need to be out there listening to what people have to say. And if there are some misconceptions out there, we can address those one-on-one. But I think we're going to have to be very active and be out there.
I agree with you. We're going to have to take every opportunity we have. And if the issue is people will not come to these forums that we set up, if we're at a basketball game at halftime, before they shoot the free throws or three-point shots, we need to get out there with our message, and we need to say it. A wrestling match, wherever, we need to, every opportunity we have, we just need to talk about the district. I said it before, and I mean that. You don't just start a levy campaign when you're trying to go on the ballot. A levy campaign is every day of every second of every school year, and then some. And I think that that's something that we've lost along the way. But now we have another opportunity. We have an opportunity to do better. When you know better, you do better. And I think that's how we have to see this. And I agree, social media is a passive way to do things, but nothing takes the place of getting in front of people. And it's hard sometimes, but it's something that we're going to have to do. There's no substitute for it.
And if I can just say, if you, along the lines of what Dr. Hebert said, if you consider an emergency levy, putting a dollar amount out there, certainly by providing levy facts during a campaign, to explain how the district spends $2.7 million may be a different message, right? So now you have a clear dollar amount going forward, and there's different financial facts that you could provide to that. For one, it being about 10% of our budget. So, what chunk of that 10% of our budget do you want to describe, right? 80% of our budget is salary and benefits, but 10% of our revenue would be about $2.7 million. So again, I think it comes down to different messaging with that emergency levy, which may be a little bit easier to communicate during, financial facts forum. Like you said, getting that message out there at every opportunity.
So what is the pleasure of the board?
So if you want to move forward with either or both of these resolutions tonight, you would need to make a motion, have a second, any discussion, and then we'll do a roll call vote on one or both of them if they both get two motions.
I move we adopt number one and approve that resolution, the first resolution.
Do we have a second? And that is for the emergency levy?
Yes.
Second that.
Yeah. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Before we can approve it, I just want to make sure that those 3 points are addressed. Again,
Have to be now.
yeah, we need to identify an amount. The template that you had there, obviously this one is, number one is for the emergency levy, so that identifies the type of levy. And the template was pre-populated with the 5-year. So if that is your pleasure, we will leave the 5-year in there, or we can adjust it to 10. But I also need someone to include the dollar amount before you can vote on approving that.
And then you've ran the financials, obviously, so what is your recommendation
Yes,
as
what
far
is
as the dollar amount?
I would recommend that we continue with the 2.7 million, which is about what we would have received on the new valuation in 2024 of the 6.9 mil levy.
So I think we've answered what type, the emergency,
Yes.
how much, the 2.7, and then for a 5-year period.
5-year period.
Okay, thank you.
So now, if there's no other discussion, can we have roll call, please?
Mrs. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Tantamonia?
Yes.
Mrs. Dennison?
Yes.
Mrs. Calhoun?
Yes.
And again, the second item on there for approval is the current expense levy. Again, the district, the board does not need to go forward with that, or they can and consider that for another 2 weeks until we come back to our board meeting and look at the second resolution.
But we can approve it now, and then if we want to pull it at our next meeting, we can do that also?
Yes, you can.
Okay. I would move for us to approve the current expense one as well tonight.
Okay?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Now, the discussion for this would require us to identify the amount of mills that we would want to include. Again, levy number 2 is set up to be a current expense levy, and the template included a 5-year length of time. So if you want to adjust that, you can make it a 5-year, a 10-year, or a continuing. So those are your options for length of time. But again, the recommendation would be about 6.9 mils, and I believe on the new valuation for 2024, you'll generate about $2.7 million.
I'd say continuing. We just did the first one for the emergency.
Continuing would be the length of time. So the last 2 attempts we did were for 5 years.
Oh, they were?
Oh,
Yes.
Oh,
Let's
okay.
do
I like
that.
that the 5-year, like you said,
Yeah,
ties
leave
with
it
the
at
5-year
5.
plan. It's consistent with our
We're gonna
strategic
do
plan initiative.
emergency,
It just
though,
makes,
so
it
I'd
makes
rather-
sense. A decade is a long time to ask. You know, it just seems like that's excessive. I know that it's needed, but I think that 5 years is a easier pill to swallow for people. But that's just my opinion.
Do you think it's smart to go with a 2.7 mil per year or a 2.675 that shows you really studied it carefully instead of a round figure? You're saying the emergency is 2.7, right?
Million.
No,
Million
no,
dollars.
2.7, yes, that's the dollar amount. 2.7 is the
Right.
dollar amount.
2.7 million, right. I wonder at times whether it's wise to go with just a rounded figure like that, or to look at a figure that, you know, why do people price things at $6.99? Why don't they just say $7? Because 6.66 sounds a lot like less money.
That was the reason we went with 6.9 mils. We really wanted 7 mils, 6.9 mils. You know, which is
Right.
equal to about
Really.
$2.7 million each year. You know, so
But it's the same amount, actually,
pretty
either
close.
way.
I mean, really, one is about semantics and one is about,
Long-term, right? So So just to clarify, we have a motion and a second for approval of the second resolution, the current expense levy. Again, right now, the template is for 5 years, which is what we've done in the past. And the recommended amount in the past has been 6.9 mils. But that would be the approved amount, and it would be certified by the county auditor to collect about $2.7 million. I don't know if it would be exactly 2.7, but it would be certified at about $2.7 million. And then that amount would be maintained over the 5 years. The millage would be reduced to adjust for any increases in valuation. So, Mrs. Calhoun, if you wanted to clarify those points and then call a roll, or...
So are we comfortable, first off, with the 6.9 mil and the 5 years? Or you want it to...
I can't hear you.
Are we comfortable with the 6.9 mils for the 5-year period? For the 5 years?
For the current expense levy.
For the
current expense levy?
the what levy?
The current expense.
The second.
Item number 2 on the agenda. Do we want to continue the 6.9 mils for 5 years?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in agreement.
Okay.
Okay.
So we had a motion. right?
Yes, and we have a second, so we can call the roll. Mrs. Dennison?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Tantamonia?
Yes.
Mrs. Calhoun?
Yes.
Okay, so since both of those resolutions were approved by the board this evening, I will send them both to the county auditor for certification, and you'll see them both again on the December 4th board agenda. At which time you can either choose to move forward with both of them, you can choose to move forward with one or the other, or you can choose to not move forward with either. All right, thank you.
Do we have need for, so we do have need for an executive session. What is?
And so we have need for an executive session or a private session controlled by the Sunshine Law for the special purposes of employment, discipline, compensation of a public employee, and preparing for, conducting, or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation. So it's 2, 4, 7, and D.
Can we have a motion? Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Tantamonia?
Yes.
Mrs. Dennison?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaman?
Yes.
Mrs. Calhoun?
Yes.
Okay, I have 6:32.
Does that work for you? Okay. We're adjourned, gentlemen.